Assalamulaikum everyone and welcome to the very first episode of season 2 of Project Manchala. For those of you joining for the very first time, my name is Mohammed Abbas Merchant. I am a photographer and filmmaker based in Karachi, Pakistan, and I'm also a second year LLB student. So let's get on with the very first episode. So today we're going to be talking about something that I'm sure a lot of you relate to and have probably experienced at one point or another in your life, and that's basically burnout. Ah, bas- Basically, burnout is when you are physically, mentally, and emotionally exhausted to a point where you cannot function, in lay terms. So, for me as a photographer and then a filmmaker, burnout is something that I am very used to, for one thing. Um, it's something that I've experienced on numerous different occasions because being in a creative field, for one thing, you're constantly on your feet, you're constantly thinking, you're constantly having to adapt and evolve, and just work in every capacity possible. So, burnout is something that I've experienced when I've felt like my photography was just at a point where I'm like, okay, what next? What do I change? What do I do that's different? You know, because being a photographer, especially a photographer in Pakistan these days, is a very difficult task because ek to, the market is very saturated these days. In case you people weren't aware, for photographers, honestly speaking, it's become to a point where photographers are a dime a dozen. You will find photographers literally everywhere on Instagram if you scroll just 5 minutes on Instagram. And because of how saturated the market is, it becomes increasingly difficult for people like me to set ourselves apart from the crowd and be able to establish ourselves as worth ekto the money and then the investment that you're putting into us, right? So I found myself at different occasions where I was just like unsure of what to do to set myself apart. And then one of the biggest things that I'm sure a lot of photographers who may be listening or watching right now are facing is what to do with our feeds. So having a creative field and then having to present your work are two completely separate things. Like I can create stuff, I can be very creative in that regard, but I am terrible at presenting my work or just putting it online. I personally struggle a lot with putting my work online because I'm so very unsure of how to present it, how to market it. And that's a very big part of my field. That's a very big part of my job, being able to present myself and my work in a way that's appealing to future clients or recurring clients. Okay, this person still has it, or they still have that sort of thing that set them apart in the start. So it's a very difficult task to be able to put myself completely out there, but then also still appeal to the masses. So, because of how saturated the community, I guess you could say, is getting, it's becoming increasingly difficult for photographers to set ourselves apart because there will always be someone who's doing it cheaper. There's always someone who's just, going to get it done in less time, something or the other, right? But obviously, when you're going for someone who's doing it in less time or less money, you're obviously going to be sacrificing for quality. But the issue is that a lot of these new clients or companies or startups or whatever, they don't understand is that quality may be either very substantial or not as big, but it does make a difference, right? So as an example, I've been doing photography for about 4 years now, 3 years professionally, and usme I've learned a lot in terms of editing, right? I started off just using Lightroom for all of my edits. Lightroom is primarily for color correction and whatnot. And then Photoshop is when you go into the depths, working on, let's say, dark circles, pimples, acne, and just a little more in depth with the photos that you would do. Um, so initially I was just focused on Lightroom. I was like, oh, this is easier, quick edits, just make a preset, copy paste, and it just made my work and my life a lot easier. Just stick to Lightroom, and eventually, as time went on, I realized, okay, I need to step up my game. there's a lot that I'm doing that's, it's good, but it could be better. So I started to learn how to use Photoshop. So that gave me a slight edge over just the average photographer. I already had that competitive edge because I had learned how to use Lightroom already. So when I started using Lightroom, I was using it on my phone and then my iPad. But eventually, with time, I started using it on my laptop, and I was like, oh my god, this is like a completely different game, right? So I already had that competitive edge because I knew how to use Lightroom a little bit better than my peers because they might not even be using Lightroom, or if they were, they might not be using it to its full capabilities. So I started using Lightroom, learned it in really as much as I could at the time, just YouTube and experimenting. And for a time that got me very far, but then eventually I realized, okay, I need to now also use Photoshop to get into the minute sort of details. I need to work on the dark shadows. I need to work on the acne. I also need to work on lightening certain parts and then darkening certain parts without affecting the entire image as a whole. So that really helped me as a whole. But again, there will always be things that make a huge difference, but then not translate to the final project. On a very recent project that I was working on, I got hired by a fashion startup, and one of the dresses that they had, it was basically an open back sort of thing, not an open back, but like a deep back. Now, basically, one of the models that I was working with at the time, she had like a lot of back acne, or I don't exactly know the entire details behind it, but she basically had like a lot of back acne, and I believe she also had some scars, sorry, from chickenpox or something or the other, right? So I took two pictures of the back just to show off the design, and individually, both of those images took me a very significant amount of time. Now, when you look at the final result, you don't know the amount of time and effort I've been putting into just the back, just the hours that I've been putting into it. Now, if I had done this maybe even a year back, that would have taken me a lot more time than it did already. Like, it already took me a good amount of time because there was a lot to work with, for one thing, but then also because just generally working ecto in the sort of way that I am, it's still just me. It's still as a freelancer, right? So it's already much more difficult than someone who's working in a studio or like a proper firm or something, right? So it already took me a lot of time, but the issue is that clients don't know that. The clients don't know what goes on behind the scenes. They don't know what goes on in the editing room. So these sorts of things really just sort of pile on until it gets to a point where I need a break. So I sometimes end up taking weeks, maybe a month or two away from photography because I just, need to unwind. I need to let out all the emotions because photography, as much as I love it, it is a lot of time, it's a lot of effort, and sometimes working with new people, new models, new clients, new concepts, it becomes very, very draining on me. So I need to step back because I know if I don't, I'm just going to burn out. And that burnout is going to be much more destructive and it's going to be much longer than the break that I would take personally. So this burnout is, it's basically this sort of feeling inside of me wherein it's not just I don't want to do photography. I feel like I can't anymore. I feel like if I pick up a camera right now, I'm ekto not gonna know how to take that picture, and if I do manage to take it, I'm just not gonna enjoy myself. The last burnout that I had in recent memory was around Eid, um, basically around June, I believe, and that was just around the time that my exams were finally wrapping up. I had to take a step away from photography for quite a while, and at that point, I just felt so burnt out from my exams and everything that when I took pictures on Eid, I didn't know how to work my camera for a good bit, and I was just so upset and frustrated with the situation. I didn't know what to do. So burnout for creatives can be very, very destructive in ways that I honestly can't put into words at times with how difficult it may be, but it's honestly something that you need to know when it's going to come and how to deal with it so you can get away from it before it already sets in, right? The way that I've started to do it is basically know my limits, learn how much I can push myself, and then when it's getting to a point where I'm like, okay, now this is getting borderline to a point where I'm not enjoying it. So learning when your work stops becoming enjoyable and when it starts becoming work is very, very important as well. So I've tried to mold my work in a manner where I'm like, okay, client work, personal work, experimental work. So that's three stages of work that I'm trying to balance all together, right? So client work, there's a sort of limit to what you can do and how creative you can be. Obviously, you're supposed to bring your talent, your look to the images that you're producing as a photographer. But then there's also going to be the client brief that you have to keep in mind. The client's like, okay, I want this specific look that XYZ brand is doing or XYZ photographer is doing, blah, blah, blah. So obviously, at times that's a little difficult to work with because that's not what you're used to. So, करना पड़ता है because at the end of the day, it's the client. So थोड़ा बहुत करना पड़ता. But it gets very difficult when you're trying to do that, but also staying true to yourself. So अब client work तो obviously अपनी जगह पे, right? So I also try to do some shoots just for myself, which is just sometimes getting my friends together and practicing just to keep myself on my toes. And then sometimes this is something that I've only recently started doing, wherein I want to just go out sometimes and just shoot, and sometimes also experiment with a new style of editing. So sometimes these sorts of things work out, sometimes these sorts of things don't. um, but sometimes it just makes this sort of thing where it's enlightening. I don't think that's the right word, but basically I feel light. Like my chest feels easier to breathe through. I feel as if taking that time out for myself with my camera is very therapeutic for me, because even if I don't end up posting those pictures, I still had a good time. I still took my camera out. I learned something new. I probably screwed up once or twice, but it's something that was very important for me in that moment. So that really, really makes me happy. And I realized that tackling my burnout at times is very, very easy, but then at times it's very, very difficult because sometimes it'll happen for reasons outside of creativity. Sometimes it'll happen because university is being very difficult. Sometimes it'll be because family is being difficult to work with. So burnout will always happen for a reason or the other, but it's very important to know when it's going to happen and how you're going to be tackling it, because I've had moments where I've felt like I couldn't do this anymore. I've looked through pictures and I've just found faults everywhere, and I've just been like कि यार मैं ये कर भी क्यों रहा हूँ, you know? Like I've put so much time and effort into this. I've put money into this now. Was this the right choice? Was this a smart decision? And moments like that are truly very, very frightening because you don't know what to expect when you're doing these sorts of things. And it sometimes gets difficult, but it's okay because at the end of the day, it was worth it, right? In that moment, it might not seem like it, but eventually, when you get back to it, it all starts making sense. This sense of warmth and just comfort inside of you. Okay, it was difficult at one point, but it's gonna be okay. I've personally been going through what feels like burnout for my filmmaking for a majority of this year. COVID-19 has affected people in ways that I don't think anyone ever anticipated or ever could have imagined to plan for, because this is not the sort of thing you plan for, right? I don't think filmmakers ever anticipated that there would come a time where एक तो they can't go out to film, and they would have to work with as little people as possible because, sorry, films are generally made by huge teams of people, right? So you have a lot of people working to make maybe even like a 5-minute video on YouTube, and it's very difficult to make that quality of content without that huge team. I've seen some of my favorite filmmakers just struggling throughout this year because one of their primary sources of income just had to come to a close. And I've seen some of my favorite photographers just not getting work because everyone has to work from home. Everyone's trying to avoid as much exposure as possible. For people in my field, creatives who literally have to work with people, it's very, very difficult to imagine a world like this. Um, I've tried not to let COVID though affect myself in ways that I start putting it on myself. Oh, I could think of a workaround, I could do this, I could do that, but I haven't been able to, and that really, really bothered me for the longest time. But eventually, I started realizing that these situations happen for one reason or another, right? Sometimes you're going to be faced with situations where you can't work with a lot of people for whatever reason, and maybe it's not going to be as bad as COVID, but I need to work in a manner that I can work with as little people as possible but still produce the same level of content. That's obviously easier said than done. So for the past couple of months, I've been working on different scripts and just different ways to continue to work on my films. That's although been something that I've been focused on actively and working on. It's been very, very difficult to do because university, home life, and then trying to handle freelance work is all just a very big thing, right? And although I've still had, alhamdulillah, a lot of success in the past month or so, it's just been a lot to deal with. I have at least three scripts ready for short films, but I have no team, I have no time, and sometimes I have no energy to go out and shoot. So it's a very, very difficult thing to deal with. कि यार, for once, I feel like I'm doing well. I'm on a good track. I'm not upset. I'm not worried. My emotions are in check. I might even have some resources to help me with this project, but I'm unable to because of XYZ reasons. That caused a huge sort of dissatisfying that dissatisfaction. That's the word. So dissatisfaction in myself to a point where I had to figure out कि आगे क्या करना, आगे कैसे बढ़ना है. Because this was a very big part of my life, right? That I've been neglecting. YouTube is a very big part of my life that I'm neglecting, and I needed to understand. Yeah, these sorts of things happen, and because I was pushing myself so much, I was forcing myself to do it. I was like, नहीं यार करना है करना है करना है किसी न किसी तरीके से कुछ करना है कुछ डालना है. That एक तो made me complacent in ways that I was producing content that was easy to make and sometimes just easy to edit, just quick to put out there. So that obviously had its sets of issues to deal with. Okay, I was putting on content that I was okay with, but I was not happy with. Um, that produced its own sets of just dissatisfaction and just lack of contentment with my work. कि यार मैं मेहनत कर रहा हूँ, I'm putting in time, I'm putting in the hours, but I'm not happy with it. So what's the point of it? And that just set me down a spiral where I was just not happy. I was borderline depressed with the way that my work was turning out to be. I realized that filmmaking is the thing that I really, really want. It's the thing that I'm really pushing towards. As much as I love photography and I feel like it's arguably my greatest creative skill, filmmaking is what I really, really want to do. I want to make more films. I want to put myself out there. But it's a lot of effort, it's a lot of time, and it's a lot of commitment, and I genuinely cannot do it without help. So, past couple of months, I approached a few people for help, some of my old classmates and whatnot, and of course, they were decently receptive. But again, time, right? That time investment, it's a very, very big thing. So, that just set me on a way to completely just go into this burnt out mentality कि यार नहीं हो रहा है नहीं हो रहा है नहीं करना है just put it away for a while. Though this entire year has just been start, stop, start, stop. And in terms of filmmaking, as much as it's always in the back of my head, it's always कि यार करना है, करना है, करना है, करना है. I I just can't bring myself to do it. I feel so burnt out. कि I don't know what to do, and I don't know how to handle all of these emotions. And it just I just feel so lost, and as if everything I'm doing, it's good, but is it good enough? Is it good enough to be a Muhammad Abbas merchant? I could feel that a couple of months ago, maybe at the start of this year, but I don't feel that way right now. And another really big thing is the fact that as much as I wanted to take Manchala on a more serious note, I just haven't been able to. I made a bunch of excuses. Oh, equipment nahi hai. Oh, uh, I don't know how to do it. Blah blah blah. X Y Z. Right? Like a bunch of excuses. And although I gave it a fair try with season one, season one only produced like 5 6 episodes. And although I genuinely liked some of those, I actually ended up re-listening to some of those. Uh, over the past week, I listened to Closure all over again. I listened to Gratitude all over again. I even listened to the very first episode, which was about the struggles that artists are going through, um, living in Pakistan and then living in the world in general. So this passion inside of me sort of reignited to do this sort of thing again. But I realized that I'm also the sort of person who needs a push, a big push, to actively get back into these sorts of things. So I actually contacted a friend of mine, Stephanie Felix. Some of you might know her as Snowflakes on Instagram. And I was like, listen, I want to do this again. I don't want to do it as like a sort of revamp or a repackage. I want to do it again, but seriously. I want Project Manchala to be like a proper podcast, not just something that I'm doing on Instagram and sometimes doing sometimes on YouTube and then sometimes on Facebook or whatever. I want to do this seriously. And she was like, okay, let's do it. What do you want me to do? I was like, okay, I want you to design me a logo, a cover art that I can use to distribute the podcast. And at first, although she was very hesitant to do it because she'd never done this sort of thing before, I pushed her and pushed her. And then she finally made me the cover that you guys can hopefully see now, whatever you're consuming the podcast, whether it's on Spotify, Google Podcasts, or whatever you get your podcasts. Um, that's basically what I'm now rocking, and I honestly love it in ways that I can't put it into words. But this was that push for me कि यार अब तो logo भी आ गए हैं, अब like official look आ गया है. So I can't just not do it now. So even though I've been procrastinating making this episode and this episode changed topics at least 3 times, I'm happy with the way that this episode is going. I'm happy with the fact that I'm able to put myself out there again. I'm happy with the fact that despite the difficulties that I may be going through, despite the burnout that I may be experiencing, I'm still able to be open with myself and with my audience. That sometimes these sorts of things happen, but that's okay because at the end of the day, all that matters is trying your best. Sometimes your best is going to be 100%, sometimes it's going to be 70, sometimes it's going to be 40. But that's okay because you can't expect to give 100 all of the time. Sometimes without realizing it, you're probably giving more than 100. Sometimes that could, sometimes that ends up leading all the way back to burnout. You need to know when to give your all and then when it's okay to step back just a little bit. So, Project Manchala was my brainchild probably 2 years ago, but never really took off properly until last year. Good God, I'm not even sure, to be honest. Probably at the start of this year, actually. I mean, it's more or less the year's ending, so last year. I don't know. Anyways, Project Manchala never really took off properly until I pushed myself to get in there because I've realized that sometimes I just need to push myself to do things. That doesn't mean, you know, ignoring the burnout or ignoring the way my emotions are in that moment. Sometimes that just means realizing, yeah, I'm putting things off without a good enough excuse. And I just need to shut up and just do it. Like right now, I'm sure you guys can hear I'm a little sick, I'm a little under the weather. But I don't want that to be another excuse to not do this because I've wanted to do this for a while. I've wanted to get back into this for a while. And now I finally can. So here I am, putting myself out there again. And I'm happy with the way that I'm doing it. And I'm very happy with the way that I've been able to put Project Manchala out there. So thank you guys for tuning back into the very first episode of season 2 of Project Manchala. Inshallah, this year and this season is going to be bigger and better than last year. I'm going to try my level best to improve upon things that I've already improved upon so far. Um, as you guys have already probably heard and seen, the podcast is now available on all, well, not all, most podcasting platforms were available on Spotify. We may or may not be available on Google Podcasts by the time this podcast goes live. We are available on Breaker. We are available on uh, Pocket Casts, I believe. We're also currently being hosted on anchor.fm/Project Manchala. And yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed the first episode back. So please be sure to like, share, give me some more suggestions on what you would like me to discuss given my capacity. And if you guys would like me to have a guest with a certain topic or something. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys in the very next episode, inshallah, coming very, very soon. Take care, everybody, and I hope you guys have a great week to come.